This is Night Talk Radio. In the dead of night, when all is dark and all your daytime worries may be over. In the dead of night, expanding your mind to the greater world about you. In the dead of night, when the night winds howl in the sacred hollows of the castle walls. In the dead of night, when all is still, who will you be tonight? This is Night Talk Radio on the Terror Chat Radio Network. Tonight, Halloween stories from your host, Colin Knight, and co-host, Chris Holly.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, madam and messieurs, boys and girls, mes enfants. Welcome to Night Talk Radio. I'm your host, Colin Knight. It is October the 30th, the eve of All Hallows Night, and we've got some stories for you. Joining me online is Chris Holly as my co-host from the Endless Journey blog, one of the most prolific paranormal blogs in North America. As we get into the show on haunted stories, we invite you to call with your Halloween story. Tell us what you know, what you saw, what you heard. Phone line shall be open. Sit back, get comfy, make sure you have refreshments, smoke them if you got them, crank up the sound, and we'll be right back in 60 seconds.
The voice continues after this.
Glad you could make it.
Phone lines are open, 347-324-3287, 347-324-3287. Comments and statements made by tonight's host or guests remain the opinion of the speaker and not necessarily the opinion of the Terror Chat Network. This is Night Talk Radio. Ladies and gentlemen, your host for tonight's Halloween show, Colin Knight, with co-host Chris Holly.
And good evening, everyone. Over the years, as many of our listeners know, we have done all kinds of Halloween shows. We've done specials on witches and warlocks and spooky guests with some outrageous ideas and some dark conspiratorial stories. We've done the New World Order. Of course, we've done the End Times and Planet X. And tonight, we've chosen a little bit different of a genre. Stories from the dark side. We invite you to pick up the phone and call in with your Halloween stories. We want to know your experiences tonight. 347-324-3287, 347-324-3287. Before we get started, special shout-outs to the software bookkeeper instructor, the Bricky's much better half. Nice hairstyle and color. It definitely suits you. And to the Scottish lass, you can't rest if you're saving the world. Your rewards are awaiting. And the future innkeeper Wildfire, welcome aboard. It is October the 30th, the eve of All Hallows Night, when the dead rise and all things spooky become pop culture for one night a year. Now, my question to you is, do you have your costume ready? Happy Halloween. We got lots of stories for you tonight, so I'll tell you what, let me give you one just to kind of start things off for the night. This has got to do with the Old Grace Hospital here in Calgary. Pretty scary place. It was a maternity ward at the Old Grace Hospital, and it was rumored to be haunted by the spirit of Maudine Riley, whose family is believed to own the land the hospital was sitting on. Now, Riley lost her baby and died herself while giving birth, and the old maternity ward is now a health resource center, and surgery patients at the facility still claim to see Riley's appearance in different rooms and hallways holding her baby. Pretty spooky stuff. Now, I don't know whether you believe in the ghosts and the people that are dead, but if you do, we'd like to hear your story.
347-324-3287, 347-324-3287.
This room has a lot of soul. Room of ghosts.
You're listening to Night Talk Radio on the Terror Chat Radio Network.
On the show with me tonight is, of course, my good friend from New York City. Of course, we're talking about Chris Hawley. Good evening, Chris. Welcome back to Night Talk Radio.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Oh,
Okay, Blog Talk Radio and the Gremlins, of course, are working their magic tonight. Good evening, Chris. Welcome back to Night Talk Radio.
Oh, gee, Colin, Night of the Canadian Rockies. It's been tough getting here.
I'll tell you, the forces are against us tonight, girl. We're just going to have to fight the good fight. You know it happens. This is what we do. You know, we fight on a regular basis to get these shows across to our clients and what have you. So tonight is Halloween. Now, I know you've been writing about the paranormal and the unusual stories for a number of years, and I bet you collected some real doozies in your time. So what do you got for me tonight?
Would you like to hear one? Yes, I have.
Sure.
Well, I have had all kinds of frightening stories told to me on all kinds of levels. But I have one that's an actual, well, I have a couple, but one that is the one that really frightened me, that occurred on October 30th on 1963.
Here, have some candy.
You gotta tell me. You gotta tell me.
Yes, it happened in the town I grew up in, and it was a river town. It was this little hamlet that was built along this long river that came in from the Atlantic Ocean into Long Island. And it was very much country at the time. Everything was spread out and not much there. It was a very New England type town. All old houses, white, just like being in New England. And there was not a lot to do if you were a teenager at that time on Long Island, especially when you wanted to have a little fun. So this story was told to me is absolutely true, but I did not see it. I was not there. I can only tell you that it's gone down in history as true from the time it happened. And it happened she was like a third cousin of mine. We were a big Irish family. Everybody was related to everybody. But this girl was a teenager that lived in the hamlet there, and she was about 18 at the time. And her boyfriend was about maybe close to 19 tops. They also were with 3 other kids between the ages of like 17 and 18. And there was a boy and 2 other girls in their back seat, and this young couple out, and they were driving in a 1963 Thunderbird. I remember it was turquoise and white with a white top. And they were out just looking for something to do. I mean, it was the night before Halloween. It was the eve. They wanted to be, scared. They wanted to have fun. So they decided that they heard many, many rumors through the years about this area in our town that was a little old, been there since I think the late 1600s. That had been, rebuilt over the years, so it was still standing and still working. This ancient graveyard that went right back to the original date of the church, and behind it, this very old mansion that was dilapidated and boarded up and falling down and had a reputation for ghosts and goblins and scary things that happened and people that would never go near it again. So, of course, where did they head in that Thunderbird, that cold, crisp fall night? Directly to the church. Now, the church had just been refurbished, and it had a little new house built behind it that they brought in a brand new young reverend to run this newly refurbished church, to rebuild its congregation and work hard there. And he lived behind the church, and then there was this scary old graveyard, and behind it, this big mansion that had been there from I don't know when, that everybody stayed away from. So they decided that they were going to go and walk around in the graveyard and look for ghosts. And they get there, and they get out of their car, which they parked up by the Reverend's new little house, and they go walking around the graveyard and decide that it's really frightening to be in a graveyard at night, the night before Halloween. So they're hearing things, and so they have the great idea. Let's jump the fence and go over to the supposedly haunted mansion and see what we can see there. Everything's a big laugh. They jump over the fence and they go into the mansion area and the old house is frightening. They're hearing noises. They think they see things.
Go ahead.
And they
Go ahead.
take and walk around behind this house and find an identical playhouse had been built at one time exactly to look like that mansion. So they decided,
Right.
well, they're going to go investigate that. So the kids all walk over, and the one kid can't see. They can't see in the windows. Everything's so filthy and falling down. So the one boy decides, well, I'm going to try the door and just see if we can, get in there, maybe if it's open. And he puts his hand on the doorknob, and the thing flies back as if someone's pulling it from the other side.
Oh, my God.
And they all go tumbling into this disgusting building, this little playhouse. And it had all odd things in there on the shelves and dusty, horrible bottles and boxes and stuff. And they said, this is creepy, and spider webs, and it was just too frightening. So they decided that they're going to leave. As they start walking away from this building, they hear something, not screaming, but growling. An extremely loud growling sound coming from the mansion. The kids all start to run. The three kids that were in the back seat of their car, the young fella and the two young girls, get a head start, and they're running. But my cousin and her boyfriend, my cousin, she said she was thrown to the ground. Everybody said, oh, she just tripped. But she went crashing to the ground. Her boyfriend turned around, saw her laid out on the ground, and ran back to help her. He could not get her off the ground and watched in horror as something beat her without mercy. About her head, was kicking her. She was being tossed up into the air, thrown back onto the ground, and he went to pull her up and stop it, and it started to attack him. And now he is also in this fight with something he cannot see. They scream for the other kids to help them. They come running back and see them being tossed about in the yard of this property, and they don't see anything there with them, and hear them screaming. And the one young girl was smart enough to say, I'm going to run and go get that reverend, the new young reverend. She ran to his house and pounded on the door, and he answered it. And she said, something's attacking the kids in the back there. We shouldn't be there. He did a strange thing. He grabbed a crucifix, a flashlight, and some holy water that he had in a jar, and went running behind them and watched for a few seconds what was going on in front of them. And at this point now, the girl wasn't no longer funny. She was covered in blood. The boy's, I think, fingers had been broken. He was trying to drag her, and he ran over and did some kind of rites and prayed and held up his crucifix and threw the holy water at the kids, so that they were able to drag them back out of the graveyard, over the fence and back into his house. They all claim, including the Reverend, that something was chasing them and howling and growling behind them as they ran in pure terror out of that graveyard into his little house and called the police. It ended up with the girl had to be taken by ambulance to the hospital, as well as her boyfriend. They were there and treated, and they had terrible cuts and bruises and broken fingers and a broken rib. They were really beaten badly. It got to the point that story got around, and no one wanted to go to that church or near the graveyard or near the mansion, which was destroying all hopes of this little church. So they had to force the community, to take down that mansion. And it took many, many bids, because the construction people who would go there to see how much they would charge to take it down had such frightening experiences when they went to, give them a price for the bid on the thing, that it took like a year for them to find somebody to do it. And they did it.
They wanted nothing to do with it.
And then they had the land blessed and turned over and so forth and so on. But to this day, which is now 50 years later, they cannot get that place up and running. There's just a blackness about that area behind that little church. And I think that really ended their Halloween Eve drives and everybody away from them.
I wonder if anyone checked into the history of what could have been the demonic possession there, because obviously it has very powerful ground, right?
Well, it's very odd because very close to this place, the whole house area was old mansions at one time. There was another horrible mansion with terrible things in it, and that was supposed to have been owned by a crazy scientist. And this house behind the church, supposedly a doctor that, who knows what he was doing in those years, with a very sinister past himself, lived in there with his family, and the family was noted to be a very rough bunch. So, it's hard to say what took place there, but I do know it had something evil living there with it, on the property.
Well, I know it got the hairs on my arms standing up, so I'm doing with the lights on, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, just so you know, because the last time Chris told me these stories, I got to tell you, it scared the bejeebus out of me. And so we've taken all precautions. Crucifix up on the wall. I got the garlic. I'm ready to go. We're ready for Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
I would say don't go where you're not sure you're going, for sure, especially on All Halloween Eve. On Halloween Eve. That is supposed to be a place where that veil of transporting back and forth between different, dimensions and what is very thin. And the kids may have taken that beating because they went on the wrong night. It could be they showed up, and don't forget there was a graveyard there too. You don't know what was buried there, but they did really suffer for their little trek to the graveyard in that mansion.
Well, I wouldn't say that I'm a complete believer, as you know. I'm somewhat of a skeptic, but I will tell you this. What I don't know, I don't mess with. If I can't say that it didn't happen, I'm not going to mess with it. You know what I mean? Let me tell you a quick story here from Alberta. This is to do with the Banff Springs Hotel. Now, Banff is a fairly famous tourist spot here in Alberta, right in the foothills of the Canadian Rockies. One of the most beautiful views you could ever see. It's got a beautiful lake, a fantastic ancient style hotel. And in this hotel, in room 873, or as the story goes, decades ago a family was murdered in this room, in the Banff Springs Hotel. And apparently when the investigation was over, the room was redone and visitors to the hotel continued to use the room. Well, guests would wake up to a hollow of screams, and the lights would flicker just in that room, and they would find bloody handprints on the mirrors. The doors to the room were eventually sealed over, and to this very day, staff at that hotel will not talk about this particular room 873 with any guest at any time. Now that's pretty freaky. And I got that firsthand when I was staying at the Banff Springs Hotel last year. And I went into town and I picked up the local legend book, and lo and behold, the legend of room 873 was there. And apparently a complete family was slaughtered in the room. Now, because it was so many years ago, we don't know whether it was a murder-suicide or whether these people were targeted or something supernatural happened. But they slaughtered the whole family. The idea that there would be bloody handprints on the mirrors, now that's freaky. That's freaky.
Very, very freaky.
And I'll give you one more. This is from Edmonton, Alberta. The McKay Avenue School. Now, once a school and home to the Alberta's first 2 legislative sessions. So it's a pretty famous place. This downtown building is now a museum, and it houses the archives and is rumored to be haunted. Apparently, objects are moving around mysteriously, and lights often turn on and off all on their own. And an employee, Ron Hladdy, claims to have used his Ouija board to communicate with a spirit who says he's a worker that fell off the room during construction and died. These things are happening. And there are people out there. We've got a local group, Cappy, I believe it's called, that head out and they check all of these rumors and legends. And we had them on not too long ago, a couple of months ago, and they were telling me about some mining areas. And I have to tell you that some of the EVPs that they got that we played on the show were very clear. Very clear, and will scare the bejeebus out of you. There is no misunderstanding what these EVPs were. The words are so clear. And I'll give you one more from this area, Chris, just to wet your whistle a little bit more. This is from Lethbridge, Alberta, down south towards the border. The Bowman Arts Centre. Now, the Bowman Arts Centre used to be the Bowman School. And as the tale goes, a young Chinese girl was mistaken for a boy while wearing traditional clothing. And went into the woman's washroom. She was beaten as punishment because in their day, things were very, very strange back in the turn of the century. They're being beaten as punishment. The sounds of a young girl crying are often heard to this day in the same woman's washroom where she was beaten. Now that's pretty darn freaky.
Yeah, it's sad too.
So it is sad. So is there a parallel universe? Are there dimensional shifts on Halloween? I can't say no, there isn't, because I really don't know. I guess you would have to experience them to appreciate them.
Well, I experienced them too, and I still don't know what to make of it. I'm going to tell you, I had many, many letters because I live in New York asking me,
Right.
on Long Island, if I've ever been to Mount Misery Road, which is a famous haunted road on Long Island, and I never went.
Good.
And I had my husband take me. And I also had made my sister and brother-in-law go with us, just so that we had 4 pairs of eyes in case we saw anything. I didn't think
Right.
that, it was just silly. And the reason I felt it was silly is it's located, right in the middle of a very busy part of Long Island. So I was never there before. So we go and we drive, and I'm going to say down into, because that's the sensation you got. As you drove down into Long Island to where this place is located and started driving around all the roads in the area known as this Mount Misery Road. And what it is that it was a place that 200 and 300 years ago was all farms and old houses, and Walt Whitman's homestead and family lived there, and it was also the location of a Civil War hospital and an old railroad station that drove the wounded soldiers into this area, and they took them to the Civil War hospital. Now it's just all these old houses owned by private, people, and large tracts of land, and there's beautiful old white houses and horses, and this skinny road, and it's just like going back 200 years ago, because there's very little, if any, like telephone wires or everything. It's completely different than any place I've ever been. So we're driving along, and we don't see anything, except my brother-in-law said to me, "Why is that train here?" And we all stop and hear a very eerie train whistle. And it didn't sound even like the modern trains we have here. And that really creeped us out. But we figured, well, there's all kinds of answers for that, what that could be. So we take and we are right. It's a very narrow, winding road. So I pulled way off of the road. I was driving and got out of the way so other traffic, if it came, we were the only ones on the road, they could get by. And I was parked right in front of Walt Whitman's father's old home, built like, 1600 and something. And we're sitting there and we're talking about what we should do next or where we should go. And all of a sudden I could feel like somebody right by my window, my driver's window. And I look up. We were looking at, I think, a map. And I looked over, and this Oriental man in what looked like a black little car was pulled right up to my window and was screaming, but I didn't hear any noise, yelling, and gesturing in anger right in my face. And I thought, oh my God. And I turned to my husband and said, "Look at this guy." And my brother-in-law said, "Oh, I just saw it. It just went by." And he was, I look again and he was gone. So I said, "That's the weirdest thing. Didn't you hear and see him screaming at me?" And they said, "No. What are you talking about?" So I look in my rearview mirror. There's no car on the road. I get out of my car and look up and down. There's no car. I said, "Oh, no, no, no." I turned the car around to the direction he was going, and we drive down. I said, "There is a driveway down here," and he went down there. We drove and drove and drove, and there was nothing but woods and open fields and the sound of that damn train. It was so bizarre. That frightened me beyond belief because I don't know, like, what just happened? What just happened here? What was that? Who was that? Why did that happen? I had nowhere to put it. No logic. Was it a ghost? Was it a dimensional shift? Was it a time thing?
Right.
Why was this man, and why was he screaming with no noise? Why was he screaming at me at all? I was out of the way, and it had all these unanswered questions. So months go by, and I wouldn't go back in the other place. But I said to my husband again one time, "Let's just go right through there fast." So he said, "Well, I'm not going back to Mount Misery Road. We already, had one experience there." And I'm getting people calling me up and telling me they're all seeing things there. So we went a few roads over in a general area and found this other house that was empty, that also had a sign. It was built in the 1600s. And I said, "Well, I don't see any ghosts, but get out." And he started to film it and then take pictures of it for me. Thought nothing of it. We got in the car and we came home. Days later, I finally had him loaded into the computer, and I almost fell down. We had the pictures of the front of the house, and he was taking them like immediately, one after the other. One shot, there's absolutely nothing upstairs in the window. The very next shot of the house he took, there's something on the upstairs window looking down at us. And there was nobody there. So I put that on my site. It's up now, and you can see it. If you enlarge it to click on it, you can clearly see the windows are blank upstairs, and then when you look, it looks like almost like a white something behind or coming through like the one window. Very freaky place. So I don't have answers for it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Like I say, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's a dimensional shift, if it's a, if it's a, I don't know. But I have to tell you, there are a couple of things that have happened in my life where I would definitely have to question my sanity sometimes. Things that have happened that are just not explainable, and scares the bejesus out of me. There's
Colin.
one I remember. I remember when I was a teenager. Let me just get this one out while I remember it. When I was a teenager, we went to the city of York, which was close to where I lived. And York is an old Roman fortress. It was built, right at the beginning of the Roman conquest of England. And the Scots used to attack it on a regular basis, and the Picts used to come in there and give them a really, really tough time a number of times. Anyway, so here we are in York, and we're walking along the Roman walls. Now, to think that Roman walls, we've thousands of years ago, soldiers marched up and down these walls.
Right.
And we went down this one concrete staircase into what looked like a cavern of some kind, but it was all Roman stone and what have you. And as we're coming down the stairs, you could hear this marching, definite in pace, left, right style marching. You could hear it thumping away. And I get down to the bottom of the stairs, and I was the first one in line, God help me. And I get down to the bottom and I froze. And I stared right ahead. And from the waist up, I saw a legionnaire, a Roman soldier, and then I saw another, and another, and another, and they marched from out of one wall, marched along the back wall, and disappeared through the other wall. There must have been a dozen of them, if not more. And of course,
God.
all of the kids are pushing down to see this. And by the time they all got down there, these soldiers had gone. And I thought, just my imagination. I think I was 11 or 12. I thought it was my imagination. But I often think back at that time, and I'm absolutely convinced that that is what I saw. Roman soldiers marching. Now, I couldn't figure out for the life of me why I could only see them from the waist up. And then we were talking to the historian, the guy that was giving us the tour, and he explained that this part of the wall had collapsed and they rebuilt it, but they had to put a foundation underneath this turret to hold it up. So the turret was actually 4 feet higher than it originally had been.
Wow.
So that would make sense for the height difference, right? They are marching at the height that it was, not the height that we were seeing it as. So, and then once he said that, I was convinced that's what I saw. Without doubt, that's what I saw.
Many people have seen the Roman soldiers marching on their, in the roads through Europe, and I'm sure that's probably what you saw. That's really incredible. I wish I had seen that. Was it? What were they doing? Looking straight ahead, or were they looking around?
They didn't even know we were there. Obviously, it was just like watching a movie, and they were just marching straight ahead, and they were in formation, and and they were left, right, kind of thing, and you could hear their sandals hitting the concrete, and it was a timed march. You could hear it. It was very specific.
Was it in color?
Kind of in color, but not in color. It was it was almost like a black and white, but they never looked solid. They were just there, but they weren't solid. I could see the wall behind them.
Yeah.
So it was kind of very, very freaky. And for an 11-year-old to have something like that, it's like, now, I wasn't traumatized. I was just fascinated. So, I've always said that I don't believe anything until I see it. Well, I saw it. And that happened. So, I can confirm I saw that. Like, it's weird. It's strange.
That is scary. You told me about one of your friends, a cop, years ago. A very, very interesting story where not all ghosts or whatever they are bad. Some are good, and I wrote a story about it, but I think you should tell it as it was told to you. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Is this the old miner one?
Yep. The guy that
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, I'll tell you that one.
Yeah.
Lie back and enjoy. Well, a friend of mine who's currently about to retire from the New York City police force. He's about, I think, 6 or 7 months away from retirement. And he told me this strange story a few years ago. Now, I've known this guy for over 30 years. And, in fact, he's become a good friend of yours too, Chris, over the years, because he passed the story on to you. So I can tell you this. This man, you think I'm a skeptic? He's a skeptic on all things paranormal. His view is very simple. If it didn't happen to him, he just doesn't believe it.
Right.
Well,
and even if he saw it, he doesn't believe it.
No.
Go on.
A few years ago, he decided he wanted to go backpacking with a couple of the other guys, and they wanted to go out into the Wild West, so to speak. So they all headed out to Montana, actually to a couple of miles south of the ranch that David Letterman now owns. And he went with these friends for about a week, just bonding with nature, away from the big city kind of thing. And the group consisted of 5 cops, and a local guide for the area. Um, Now, after they arrived in Montana, they made their way out to this one area. There was an old ghost town, a mining area. There's lots of mining areas in Montana, and where they met up with this local guide, who was going to be their guide for the trip. So the group hiked deep into this area, and when they arrived at the site, they set up their camp just before nightfall. And, all was well. The men enjoyed the break from the city, and they started up a fire, and they sat around the fire, and they had a couple of drinks and a couple of laughs, and, one guy brought a guitar, and they were singing away, right? And the local man, he knew the area, and had the group finally the next morning hike along an old abandoned road. So the next day they've had their breakfast, they're all packed up and they're ready to go, and they start hiking along this old abandoned road that looked like it was a rail spike, but it really wasn't. It was more like a cut in the forest and what have you. But it was fairly straight, and you just trek along there. Well, the men were walking along this road when they noticed a guy walking towards them from the direction of this old mine, which is where they were heading. Well, the men could see that this person was coming towards them was kind of an older guy, carrying an old sack-like bag over his shoulder. And when they got closer, they noticed the man was dressed in those old style of coveralls, those before the turn of the century style. He was wearing an old worn-out hat, and he had it hung low down, a big grey beard, and he looked as if he'd just stepped out of a 100-year-old photo album, as it was explained to me. Well, the group of cops, of course, being very observant as they were, they kind of stood still and stood silently as this old man walked right past them on the opposite side of the road, and they were rather shocked to see this old geezer out there alone, and all he had was this old sack of items thrown over his shoulder, and they stood and they watched him as he walked by, and the old man simply looked into their eyes and tipped his dirty old hat and muttered, "Good day to you, boys," and kept on walking. Well, the local man who was guiding the cops stood perfectly still, watching the policemen as they encountered this old man walk by. Well, quickly the old man made his way past the group of men and around the bend in the road, and they watched as he walked out of sight, and was still surprised to find him up there all alone. They just couldn't put it together. Like, the guy didn't look like he was camping, or he didn't have any camping stuff with him or anything. So my buddy, he turned towards the guide, and he asked the guy, "So does the old timer live out here or something?" And the local guide kind of smirked a little bit and threw his knapsack down on the ground and looked at the rest of the guys, and he told them to do the same, and the men all dropped their gear and sat down to rest. And then the local guide looked at each of these cops, and basically told the story. "Well, boys, you just got your first look at old Joe. He's the ghost of the mine road." Now, these cops all laughed, right? Until they realized that this guide was serious, and one by one they finally stopped laughing, and the guide continued, "Seriously, guys, that was old Joe." Well, the local man went about telling the group that the old miner had been walking the road for about 100 years, greeting everyone that passes with the same tip of the hat, and no one knows why Joe walks the road and why he makes himself so clearly visible, and the fact of the matter is that old Joe does this, and they just saw him with their own eyes. Well, of course, the cops are skeptical. They couldn't really process what they had just been told, and had a hard time really considering the old man who walked by was actually a ghost. They felt a little uncomfortable with the entire encounter because, as cops, of course, they have to have an answer to a problem, and they just didn't have it. Well, the trip ended, and the cops returned home and went back to their normal New York life and routines, and they talked about the ghost of old Joe for years. It was an experience that none could forget, even though there wasn't much to it. Now, I was told the same story for years by my buddy, and his friends told me, and I convinced him to tell you the story, Chris, which is how you guys met. So he never admitted that old Joe was a ghost. He just said he didn't know who the old man was, or where he had come from, or where he was headed. Um, he had no idea why he was on that deserted road in the middle of nowhere, and he also told me the old man had the oddest bright green eyes he had ever seen. So now skip ahead to October 2008. Now I was in New York in 2008 on a business trip and met up with my cop pal, and we were invited to dinner by a party hosted by some mutual friends. And while at the party, my pal told me about an experience he had that really upset him. He told me he was at work one night and he was patrolling an old building site on the Upper West Side of New York City. It was part of his beat, and he was making his rounds, which took him past an old alley between two buildings. So he decided to have a look down the alley, take a look around. Now, this is not usually a good idea without a partner, but he'd been around enough. He figured he was okay. It was unusual for him to do this while he was by himself, but what the hell? And he told me he rarely wanders off without his partner, but thought he would be gone for a couple of seconds, couple of minutes. So he walked along this alley, when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a man rushed him. He knew his attacker wanted his weapon and cash, and realized at once his attacker was trying to stab him. So he was pushing and shoving and pushing and shoving. He couldn't get to his holster, and he was trying to keep the guy off his gun, and you know.
Yeah.
But the guy just kept coming. His attacker was strong and fast, and my buddy, all alone, is in a battle with him, and is mortified that this guy is going to be able to grab his gun. And my buddy, old-time cop, didn't have a taser, and didn't have a taser or anything like that. So, his hands were busy. Well, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, my buddy sees an old homeless dude pushing a shopping cart, coming at them in full force as his attacker and them was still struggling. The old man just appeared, and somehow this guy got this shopping cart shoved over and pushed between the two of them somehow, and the old man was loudly mumbling something, and he just pushed the cart, and this guy fell down, and it was just frightening. So my buddy pulls his weapon and starts to look for the guy, and the guy's running down the alley. He can't get a good shot at him, so he's not going to shoot wildly, But he couldn't get over this sudden appearance of this old man, and his assault with the cart, and at the fighting the guy, and it just really rattled him, right?
Yeah.
And by the time my buddy kind of got his wits together and saw the guy running down the alley and realized he couldn't, get a shot off, he looked around to thank this old timer, and he was just looked for the old man that had passed between him and his attacker. The old man looked right at him a few feet from his face. Now this is where this story gets a little weird. My buddy swears this to be true. He's sure the old man who saved him that night with the shopping cart was the same old man he saw years ago on the mining road. He was absolutely convinced it was old Joe.
Wow.
Now, my buddy knew how crazy it sounded, but he told me that he never forgot the old man's face or his bright green eyes. He's a cop. That's his job. Observation is his job. Now, the homeless guy who pushed the man off him with his cart was definitely the same man he saw on the road years ago. He's absolutely positive it was.
Yeah.
So anyway, after he looked at him. He looked back down the alley to see if he could see this guy still running, because he was, it's a good city block, and the guy wasn't moving that fast, and he was considering whether he should go after him or not. He looked down. He found the knife, so he knew he'd come close to being stabbed. And my buddy is an old timer. He didn't wear a stab vest or anything,
Yeah.
The old man in the car gave him the advantage to break off contact with this guy, which could have ended in a very deadly confrontation. So after the arrest, my friend looked for the man who saved him.
Didn't
he after he realized he...
if I recall, didn't your friend say, Colin, that when he turned around to look after the guy that was running away, he turned back around to say to the old man, like, where did you, and he was gone. Didn't that happen also? And he turned around and the shopping cart and the old man was gone. And he then... When he realized
he couldn't effect the arrest, he turned around to thank the guy,
and he was
the
gone.
guy was gone.
And then he went and got
spent hours.
His partner and he, I think...
He spent hours...
looking, right.
Yeah.
That's some
spent
story.
hours and hours and hours looking for... but he is absolutely convinced, just by knowing the man's face from when he saw it in the wilderness, Now, this guy's a 35-year police experience with no explanation of what occurred in that alley. He's positive it was the same man. Positive.
And why would a homeless guy who sees a policeman and a man fighting, he wouldn't go down there to get in the middle of it? He might maybe go call another
You wouldn't think so.
No, he wouldn't push all his belongings down in between them to break it up. That was definitely his guardian, old Joe, who decided to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think so.
Wow, that's
think
something.
So. For whatever reason, there was a connection, and like I say, you know who I'm talking about. The guy has not got a funny bone in his body. He's Mr. Police, New York City police officer serious. He doesn't come across lightly on that. Tell you what, Chris, let's take a couple of minutes break here. Coming up to the top of the hour, we're going to go another 30 minutes. What the hell? And we invite the people out there that are listening. If you have a nice little ghost story you want to tell, 347-324-3287.
Happy Halloween. Looking to email the show? TerrorChat2012@gmail.com.
Good stuff, eh? Good stuff. You quote me again.
In the dead of night, when all is dark. 347-324-3287. 347-324-3287.
Kepler satellite has identified 2,000 planets orbiting other star systems. So tonight, when you look at the night sky, realize that somebody could be looking back at you. Now, if there is a life form out there, they could be literally millions of years ahead of us. The universe is 13.7 billion years old, so a million years is nothing compared to the age of the universe. And for the most part, I think they're going to be friendly. But if they are hostile, it would be like Bambi meeting Godzilla if we ever had to fight them.
You're listening to Night Talk Radio on the Terror Chat Radio Network.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
Well, realize that if they're that advanced, they can reach the Earth from a distant star. They are already thousands of years ahead of us in technology. And we would present no military challenge to such an advanced civilization. Now, realize for the most part, there are lots of uninhabited planets with resources on them. So if they can reach the Earth, they can certainly reach other planets that are uninhabited. So for the most part, I think they're going to leave us alone. But if one of them is hostile, watch out. We would be a pushover for them. Forget all the Hollywood movies.
347-324-3287. 3287 347 324 3287.
Happy Halloween. And indeed, happy Halloween. The 30th of October, the night before All Hallows Eve, when the dead arise. Dimensional shifts, if you want to call them that, when it happens, ladies and gentlemen. The peak of the paranormal phenomenal season. A night where children enjoy the candy. Children enjoy the door-to-door candy and dressing up in their costumes, but it has a far more sinister effect during the year for those that have watched the paranormal and seen the paranormal. And Chris, tell me another story.
Well, I'll tell you, I hate to tell this one story, although it's one of the reasons I started to write at all about the paranormal. It's because I lived through something that was so horrifying that I decided to start to write about a lot of strange things that took place on Long Island. This story I'm going to tell you, I believe in my heart of hearts, has some kind of connection to Plum Island. And I'm sure everybody knows that's that terrible island on the end of Long Island where they did terrible experiments, and it's been linked from everything from monsters to aliens to, it's just a horrific, terrible place where they do terrible, terrible things. And they
aren't they? Don't they say Plum Island is where the Lyme disease actually originated?
Yes,
The blame Plum Island for that?
Yeah, well, they don't have to blame it. It's where it came from. And many other assorted horrible, terrible things. Plum Island, and then they keep claiming that they're closing it down and there's nothing going on there. And the next thing you know, there's people working back there again, and it's all top secret. And, I mean, it's ridiculous. It's where they found the Montauk Monster laying on the beach. It's the place where in 2000, I think it was in AIM, not too long ago, maybe a little longer, they found a body of a man on the beach, and he had a hole drilled in the back of his head, and he was very odd in many ways, but the most odd thing was his fingers were 18 inches long. And he was laying dead on the Plum Island beach, and the local cops saw him, they collected him, and the military came in and took him away. And it made all the Long Island papers, but it didn't nationally. It was covered up. That's Plum Island.
Right.
So I lived on Long Island, not too far from Plum Island. In an hour ride, you're there from where I was living at the time when this happened. So this happened in 1967, and I was 16 years old. And I had just gotten my junior driver's license, which meant in those years that I could drive until night. And this was in the summer, so at 9 p.m., I better be home with my car and not caught driving, or I would not get my regular senior license when I turned 18. So in order for me to maintain a license, I couldn't drive at night. So I'm out. My parents had gone out. My other siblings were gone for the night. I think it was only my brother living with us then. And I was driving my mother's 1966 yellow Malibu convertible, Chevy convertible. So I was,
Sweet.
Oh yeah.
Sweet.
And I was with my two girlfriends, and we were all shoved in the front seat, hair blowing, because we were 16. And the only place that we all hung out at that time was a McDonald's the next town over. And at that time, McDonald's was just the arches and, opened up. And all the kids in their cars, in their muscle cars at the time in the 60s would go and hang out there. So that's where we were. I think it was a Friday night. I don't even remember now, although I should have it engraved in my mind. I think it was Friday night. My parents had gone out to dinner. My brother, I don't know where he was. And I was with my three two friends and me, the three of us. And we were allowed to stay at McDonald's, and I had to have that car home by 9 o'clock and stay in the house with my friends until my parents came home. And then my parents would drive my girlfriends home.
Gotcha.
Okay, fine. 9 o'clock comes, oh gosh, I got to go home. So we go driving home, and I pull up in front of my house, and I leave the car out in the road instead of up in the driveway because I hadn't finished putting the hood up, not the hood, the roof up. It was a convertible, and I had to put it all back and make it pristine the way my mother gave it to me. And we pull up in front of my house, and it's all dark. And I thought, gee, my mother usually at least leaves a light on, you know. But the house was all dark, and we had been sitting at McDonald's drinking Coke after Coke after Coke because that's all we could afford with our 30 cents worth of gas we put in the car. And we, all three of us, had to go to the bathroom, so we were going to wet our pants. So giggling and laughing, we go running up to the front door, and I open the front door, and we run in, and we run right into the hall, and I throw on like one light in the house, and we go into my family's bathroom, which was two parts. It was one part where you had the toilet located, and then the other part was double sinks and a vanity area. So the one girl isn't going to the bathroom, and I'm standing with the other one, and we're fixing our hairs and everything, and deciding we're going to watch something on TV or something, and if we put the car back to rights. And all of a sudden, my friend looked at me, and, oh, no, I'm sorry. Then she went to the bathroom. My other friend came out who had been in the bathroom first, and she looked at me, and as we were combing our hairs, and so she said, "Did you hear that?" And I said, "No, I didn't hear anything." And then I went, and the two of them are standing by the sinks. When I come out, they said to me, "There's somebody in the house." So I said, "What are you talking about?" And with that, we hear a noise, and it was like somebody dragged a chair on a wooden floor, something like that. And we did what all 16-year-old girls do. We started screaming and burst out of the bathroom, screaming out the front door, out of the house, and I had shoved the keys to the house and the car and everything in my pocket of my pants. So that was the only thing that saved us because I had them with me, and jumped in the car. I got so frightened that, I started up the car and I started to want to drive, and my friend said to me, "Oh God, look at the house." And I looked up, and someone or something, whatever it was, had turned on the front stoop, the light in the front of the house, turned it on, turned on the lights in the living room, turned it off, put the lights on the bedrooms on and off, into the kitchen on and off. The lights were flickering all over the house at lightning speed, so that a person couldn't actually run around and do that, but it was being done. So this absolutely terrified me. So I started the car. So we started the car. There was no cell phones back then. And as I'm driving, I'm trying to put the roof up on the car. And we made it down the road a little bit, put the roof up, locked it, and went over to my friend's house, who was the closest house there, because it wasn't even close to, go make a phone call for the police or anything like that. Closest thing was to go get help either at the firehouse in town, where the police hung out, or to somebody else's house. My neighbors were not home, as it would have it, so we drove around the corner up the street to her house. Her teenage brother was home, who was much older than us. He was like 19. And his two friends, college friends, were there. And we tell them this, and they say, "Oh, we'll go back with you." So they get in our car, and the one friend followed in his car, because after they straightened out the silly girls, they were going to go take off for the night. It was funny. Excuse me. I had to take a sip of something. So they drive back, and I have the one boy in my car and the two friends behind us. We pull up in front of our house, and the other two boys come and pile in my car, my mother's car, with us, and we're all sitting there, and they say, "So the lights are on in the house, big deal." And we just sat there, and then it started. Those lights put on a display I will never forget. I don't know how they did it or who did, but it was all the lights in the house blinking on and off at different intervals over and over. So it was like a blinking Christmas tree. And then finally left with them all shut back on. Then we heard it. It sounded like something scraping down the wall. And with that, a howl, a screeching howl, screaming like in anger. And with that, my friend said to me, "This is way too much for us. We need to go get help." So he said to his friend, "I'm taking them down the street away from here. I want to, don't want to be too close. Get in the car, go to the firehouse, and get the cops." So they jumped in the car and went tearing into town. I started driving away too, also at the same time. Slowly though, and we kept watching, and the light show was still behind us going on. And I was crying because I didn't know what this was. As we made it up to where we turned, because we're out in the country, so everything's far away, my parents just so happened to be coming home from dinner. And behind them is the police and the friend. And the cop car, and so then I make a U-turn. We all go back and pull in front of my house. So my parents get out of the car. "What's going on here?" And the cop gets out, and we all start talking at once, telling him at once. And then I just am crying, and the other girl's crying. So the older boy, very shaken, was able to control himself enough to tell the cop what we saw and heard. So the cop looks up at the house with my father, and he says, "Well, I'm going to go up and we'll open up and go in." And as they're walking up to the house, it had one more quick light flicker, and my father said, "What the hell is that?" And it screamed one more time, and I actually saw the cop back down, push my father back, and they backed away from the house, and he unholstered his gun, and he said, "I'm going to call for backup." And they just stood and watched the house from the outside. When the other cars came, the cop talked to the cops. They surrounded the house. They went in. They searched everything. They were in there for a long time. They finally came out and sent the boys home with the other two girls. They told them to go home, lock themselves in their house, and don't come out till tomorrow, which they did. And I'm there alone with my parents, and my father was called in the house, and he was in there for a long time. Then they called my mother and I in, and my mother was walked down through the house into the bedroom area, where I heard her start crying. She yelled, "Oh, oh," and started crying. And with that, I broke loose from the cop that was trying to keep me talking in the living room, and ran down into my bedroom, where my closet door was opened up, and behind it was a little chair that had been kept in my father's office, a little wooden chair, and a rope that whatever it was sitting there, holding the rope, waiting for me to enter the room. At that point, I would have been killed.
God.
And my walls had big claw marks down the sheetrock. And the place, and it ripped up I had little nightgown hanging on the back of my door, and it ripped that up, ripped it and threw it on the floor. And the place smelled. It was horrible. It made you retch. And they took, I don't know.
What do you think it was?
And they took and saw that it had gotten in through the back of the house. They saw where they busted open the door and everything. So they searched and stayed there all night. Wait, it's not over. And of course I was horrified and acting out badly, and slept at the feet of my parents' bed on the floor, or in my brother's room. I didn't want to be in that house another second. And my father actually, put bars on my bedroom windows, and he put new locks on everything, and lights, everything was lit up. And I don't know what it was. Maybe a week or two later, we're sitting, and my father gets a phone call at dinner, and I can just tell by his face, and all right, okay, I'll be right over. And he said to my mother, "I got to go next door, keep them right here," meaning the kids. And we sat there and finished eating, and my father came back, and what had happened is my friend that lived next door, who was also a teenage girl, was sitting in her house, and she had a little den off of the kitchen where they watched TV, and she was sitting on the couch right under a window on the side of the house, and there was a couch under the window, and she was sitting there watching TV. And all of a sudden, something, I think the same thing, came and ripped, now think about this, ripped the window frame right out of the house so that it stuck, yes
Wow.
it did, stuck its arm in and was grabbing her. And she was home with her mother, and her father was in the military. So the house was filled with weapons that were left ready to go. The mother heard the window action and came running with a rifle and saw this horrible arm, and she said it was a clawed arm, grabbing at her daughter, and the daughter got away, and as soon as the daughter got away, she took a shot at it, and she claimed she hit it, and it went screeching and screaming and running away. Again, police back, everybody searching the neighborhood, the whole thing. Nobody knew what was happening. However, the police admitted that there was something breaking into houses, trying to bait the women into like the laundry rooms by turning the laundry stuff on or turning lights on and off again. It had been going on for a little while, and that they were searching and didn't know what it was. I think in front of my house where we lived was a strange drainage ditch that they had left open and just planted with grass. And it had these big drainage pipes in it that were about 4.5 feet high that you could actually run through. And it ran right out of where I lived to the river, out to the bay, into the ocean. That whatever the hell this thing was, or it could have come from Plum Island through the waterways, that's how it got into my neighborhood. And it came in and was looking for a young woman. It was a terrible experience.
Wow.
We shortly left after that.
Could it been a Bigfoot or a Yeti or something like that?
Island. There's no place. There's
Well, I
woods.
know.
There is a lot of it, but not enough, I don't think, to support a population like that, unless they had one and caught one and it got away. And then, yes, it could have been. But
Yeah.
it was not.
And again, like you said right at the beginning of the story, you weren't that far away from Plum Island.
Not at all. And that's why that part of Long Island has had strange paranormal events going on, that it's second nature to people that live here. Seeing a UFO, are you kidding? We all see them. We live in an island, stick out in the ocean. We live right by Plum Island and Camp Hero, and we've been seeing things flying in the sky that we don't know what they are for, 70 years. So this experience, though, was personal. This thing was going to try to get me.
Yeah.
And if I hadn't had my friends with me, and like many other times just went home alone and went in the house, I wouldn't be here talking to you today. I'm sure of it. They may have never found me again.
Wow, that's a little freaky, especially with the police sighting and your parents and kids around you and all of that, and did they ever find anything other than the scratch marks and the stench? Any hair or any
don't forget,
claws
we're
or
talking
anything?
the 60s, and they weren't really, and they were more, we could tell, though, that the police were extremely upset about this and not wanting to talk too much about it.
Right.
But they were horrified, but not surprised, if that makes any sense. In other words, I think that they knew that they had a real problem on their hands that they wish would just go away. Whether they ever caught it, killed it, I don't know. But I know that my father, shortly after, and I mean shortly, we put up a for sale sign, and we were out of there in a couple of months and moved away. So, that was enough.
Well, here's one more for you. Local spooky stuff. Again, at the Banff Springs Hotel. It's been around for a long time, so it has a lot of history. There's a legend of a bride. Now, there's a couple of different versions of the same story that I found, but it goes like this. The first version is of a bride tripping on her wedding gown and falling headfirst down at the Banff Springs Hotel. There's a massive staircase. Imagine the Titanic staircase. It's that kind of a staircase. And so this bride apparently trips on her wedding gown and falls head first down the flight of stairs and obviously is dead. The second version is the bride whose dress caught fire on some nearby candles, causing her to fall to her death. And they say that to this day, people continue to report seeing a woman in a wedding dress walking down the stairs of the hotel one day a year. And they also see a woman wearing a wedding dress that's on fire. And in both sightings, the woman often vanishes into thin air right at the base of the stairs. Now, I haven't seen this myself, but this is in the local legend books, and it apparently has a fair amount of gravitas. So, are there these paranormal activities that reoccur? A couple of years ago, I had a gentleman on that said that basically what happens with the iron that's in the building, it forms almost like a magnetic video loop of the incident. And every so often, when all of the atmospherics are right and everything, this video loop plays, and that this same scenario plays out each time, and it's a magnetic anomaly, and that's how he explains seeing these things. But I don't know, like that. There's so much paranormal activity around. Something has to be other than the life that we know.
Well, it's ghosts are a subject that I think we are very not particular about, and we should be. I think that there's many different things going on that we all put under ghosts. And I think maybe the loop idea, energy caught in this loop that replays, and I think that could be possible. We don't know. We don't know the science of it. I also think that there's things that should not be mixed in with ghosts, and I think you and I have discussed this before, like shadow people and things like that. They're not ghosts. That was never human. It's not a spirit. I don't know what it is. Just stay away from it. Black-eyed children, things like that. They don't belong in the ghost scenario. And also in ghosts, meaning spirits, once was human. I think that should be divided also. I think there are ghosts that people see of people they were connected with, that they loved, they were their loved ones, or they were their husbands or wives or whatever, lived their life with them, the neighbors next door, whatever. And those experiences I don't think are bad. I think they're good, and I think that those people come back out of love, protection, and guidance, and that's one thing. And then I think there's the other thing, which are spirits that are stuck here because there's a reason they cannot, will not, or should not move on. And that's something completely else, and I don't think people should be going and messing with those. I think that's what was possibly at that graveyard that night in that story I told. I think that there's all kinds of, I think there's evil people and evil spirits and wonderful people and wonderful spirits, and you shouldn't mix it all up in one bowl. And I don't think that you should go out of your way to connect with a spirit of something that you never knew in life. And if it's not your grandpa or your mama, don't try to connect with it. Leave it be, because it's not there for the good of you. And that frightens me about a lot of kids that put together, or people that shouldn't put together ghost hunting expeditions and don't know what they're doing and go into areas that they're not sure of. And is this a place where you can slip into another dimension or level of existence or vortex or someplace you might not be able to come back from, or is it evil? Or, these are things you got to consider when you try to deal with these subjects. And one reason I'm definitely do not have what it takes to be a ghost investigator, because I don't have the education I would need to deal with it. I don't know the right thing. I don't know the particulars, and I don't want to find out by miss and hit, attempts at something, because it could be very dangerous. You could connect yourself to something that you couldn't get rid of for the rest of your life that could end in tragedy. So, but I do.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, just as we move into the final 10 minutes, something that I've been contemplating for some time. Do you believe that our course in this lifetime, do you think it's already been charted? Do you think we already have that destiny, manifest destiny written out for us, whether we realize it or not?
Yeah, but I think we write it for ourselves. I think that we choose to go back to we picked the parents that we did and the experiences that we needed to have for our soul to advance. Right. And believe me, there's been many a day I've said to myself, why did you choose this? It's too much. You should have bit off a little less.
Right.
And, taken maybe another turn around in life. I think the whole thing is lessons learned and experiences of the soul, be it good, bad, terrible. And yes, you have to experience being a bad person, and you have to experience having a terrible life and being abused and all these things to fully understand them. For your soul, which is a piece of something much greater than just each little piece of us, for it to grow and become more. And I think that's the whole meaning of our energy and our existence, is to become as much as we learn, as much as we can, evolve as much as we can, experience as much as we can, and learn from it. And of course, I think it's to be a good person, not a bad one.
So do you think it's possible that you could meet an old soul from a previous lifetime and have that connection with that old soul? Do you think that's, you get those feelings every so often, like, I know this person, I've been here before.
Without question.
I know of,
I have
that kind
a friend
of thing.
that I'm sure of is a soul traveler friend of mine that I have argued with and can't get disconnected from no matter what I do. So finally ended up in a good friendship, which I think it needed to be. In other words, yes, I think souls travel the same roads for certain reasons, and that have been different things to each other along the way, and need to reconcile or walk a certain path together until they get that journey together right, or for what it was supposed to be. And definitely I think that. I think our children picked us, we picked our parents, and we decided the type of life to live for the lessons that our soul needed to learn. And the trick is being aware of that. And when you want to make a selfish, crappy decision, don't do it, because you're ultimately going to pay for it with your soul. And I'm not willing to do that, so I try hard. And believe me, I've been beaten up many times in my life for that, because I always think do the right thing, not the selfish thing, because I watch people who are extremely selfish and mean-spirited and things like that, and I think, it's not worth it. Karma is a bitch, and you will be back here living a much harder life until you learn it and figure it out.
I think so. I've come to the conclusion, whether it's right or wrong, but it soothes my soul that we come around this earth many, many times to learn whatever lessons we have to learn. And when we've learned those lessons, when we have all of those ducks in a row, so to speak, then we can move on to a bigger, greater place than anything that we could imagine.
Purpose.
And whether that ever, I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, and a different purpose. But I think we come around
of course.
many times.
And I'm sure, like, you've been somewhere where, let's say you went back to some old village that, they keep it just like it was 300 years ago, and they have the little low ceiling farmhouse with the fire going, and everybody dressed in the old outfits and all that stuff. And you'll go in and you'll smell something or see something that's creepy because it's so familiar to you. Although you've never experienced that or lived that way, you know it. And been to someplace or picked up something old and said, I know about this. This is so familiar to me, and I think it's from past life.
I read a story recently of a young lad, 3 or 4 years old. I believe he's in Vietnam. That was born, and he's telling people that he was killed. He was murdered, and apparently this kid took his family to an area and pointed to the man that had killed him. And they pointed to where the body was buried, and they dug up the area, and sure enough, there was a child's body there. And the man committed suicide with leaving a note admitting to murdering the child. And this child knew all about it, knew exactly where it happened, knew the weapon, the axe, showed the person the axe that was used, and then pointed to the person that did it. And from all indications, it was darn spot on.
Yeah.
And then there's that young lad that was the pilot in World War II. And he's only 9 or 10 years old or whatever, but he knows names, places, events. He knows how to fly an old World War II fighter jet. He knew all of his pals in the squad, and knew about all of their families, and he didn't learn this stuff. It was just there. And so I believe that the soul comes around many, many times, and I don't think we're supposed to remember. But there are certain keys and indicators, that every so often you find a friend that is beyond just a buddy or a pal, or that there's something more to it, because it's almost like you've always forever been with them in one form or another. And that it's a very comforting feeling, but it's also a concern, because you don't know the whole story. You don't know why you were there. You don't know who you were
exactly.
there. So that's a little difficult to swallow.
Oh, yeah, I think there's all kinds of things going on. I think we have guardians. I think we have angels around us. I think maybe one of the steps after we leave here, if we make it, is to become a guardian or an angel. I think there's an evolution to the energy of all things in the universe, and that we're just on a ladder climbing our way up.
And speaking of guardian angels, I'm getting a flash on the studio board. It's time to go. Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for scaring the beavers out of me.
You too. And happy Halloween,
and happy,
you trick-or-treaters.
Happy Halloween. Everybody out there be safe. Thanks again, Chris. With all of the recent tragedies which have dominated the news and radio, we hope you have enjoyed tonight's broadcast, if only as an escape from reality.
As we go about our busy lives, racing around on this planet we call Earth, we would ask you to give thought to those less fortunate than yourselves. Even though times may seem difficult and the pressures of life appear unsurmountable, remember, there are more people out there who do not have the luxuries we have. They survive by any means necessary. Alleviate some of that burden, and others shall lift the weight from your shoulders. Be a good neighbor, a good boss, a friend. Show those around you the true meaning of giving. Give of your time, or a shoulder or ear to a friend. Use your ability to help someone. Be a good human being. Tomorrow night, the souls of the dead arise. And from Night Talk Radio, blessings upon you all. This has been a TerraCast Network production.
Thank you for using Blog Talk Radio. Goodbye.